All right, so today we're going to try to build a kind of mental map for a world that is, let's face it, incredibly complex. The world of psychopathology. We're going to dive into how we even decide what's abnormal, look at the different lenses people use to understand mental health, and see how we've tried to create a common language for something that touches on the deepest parts of being human. Okay, let's get into it.
So, right off the bat, we run into the biggest question of all. Where exactly is the line between just being a little eccentric and having a clinical disorder? I mean, is it a hard and fast rule, or is it more of a gut feeling? What's so fascinating is that the answer almost always depends on the context. You know, a behavior like hearing voices might be a red flag in one culture, but in some African cultures, it can be seen as a perfectly normal, even spiritually meaningful experience. So the first thing to remember is context is absolutely everything.
To get a bit more concrete, clinicians usually start with a few key ideas. First, there's what we call statistical deviance. This is basically a numbers game. Is this behavior rare? But you can see the problem here, right? Being a certified genius is super rare, but we definitely don't call that a disorder. So then you have personal distress. This one looks at the person's own experience of suffering, which is a huge indicator. But what about people whose behavior hurts others a lot but doesn't bother them one bit? You can see how using just one of these leaves some pretty big blind spots.
And that brings us to a third and really important piece of the puzzle: cultural breach. This is all about whether a behavior breaks the unwritten rules of a society. And of course, this goes right back to that idea of context we just talked about. But this one's tricky too. I mean, it doesn't really help us tell the difference between someone who breaks the rules in a positive way, like a trailblazing artist, and someone whose behavior is actually harmful. So at the end of the day, defining what's abnormal is this constant, tricky balancing act between all these different angles.
So, let's say we've identified a behavior as something we need to look at. The next giant question is, why is it happening? Over time, a few major ways of thinking about this have popped up. It's really useful to think of them not as competing teams, but more like different pairs of glasses, where each pair lets you see the same complex problem from a unique angle.
First up is the one that really dominates a lot of modern psychiatry: the biomedical model. This pair of glasses sees mental disorders as, fundamentally, diseases of the body, specifically the brain. It looks for causes in our genes, in the complex dance of our brain chemistry, and in the physical wiring of our neural circuits. This is the perspective that gives us medication and the hope that by mapping our DNA, we might find new ways to help people. Now let's do a complete 180. The psychoanalytic model, which you probably associate with Sigmund Freud, looks inward. From this point of view, our problems aren't caused by faulty brain wiring, but by these deep, unresolved battles raging in our unconscious mind. The constant tug-of-war between our basic drives, the id, our rational self, the ego, and our inner moral compass, the superego, can create anxiety that bubbles up to the surface as symptoms.
And finally, the cultural model zooms all the way out. It basically says, hey, you can't understand any human behavior without understanding its cultural setting. This model gets that our culture doesn't just shape what we call a disorder, it shapes how we feel it, how we show it, and what it even means to us. And in the world we live in today, you can see why this lens is absolutely essential for anyone in the mental health field.
Now, with all these different definitions and ways of explaining things, you can probably imagine that for a long time the field was, well, a bit of a mess. There was this desperate need for some kind of order, for a shared language that would let doctors and researchers actually talk to each other. And this led to one of the most ambitious and, controversial projects in the history of psychology.
And that's where this book comes in. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The goal was pretty straightforward, but the task was huge: create one uniform set of criteria. The idea was to get everyone on the same page, so a doctor in one country could understand a diagnosis from another, so schools could teach the same things, and so researchers could build on each other's work. It was an attempt to create a solid foundation for a more scientific approach.
But here's the thing. The DSM hasn't been this single static rulebook. Oh no, it has gone through a fascinating evolution. The first one, back in '52, was full of Freud's ideas. But the real revolution happened in 1980 with the DSM-3. It intentionally became atheoretical. Basically, the creator said, look, let's stop arguing about the why for a minute and just agree on the what. It was all about focusing on observable symptoms to make diagnoses more reliable. Fast forward to today, and the latest version is weaving in modern neuroscience, recognizing that things we thought were totally separate, like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, might actually share some genetic links.
But even with a book as detailed as the DSM,
Diagnosis is never, ever as simple as just checking off boxes on a list. And this is so important. At its heart, it's a deeply human interaction. A good clinician has to look past the symptoms and try to understand the whole person, their life, their story, their culture.
You know, this idea is just captured so perfectly in this quote from the novel Nervous Conditions. It gets right to the core of what real clinical skill is. It's not just about what's in a book, it's about developing an earned authority, that deep experience, to recognize suffering when he saw it. It's about seeing someone's pain, validating it, and helping others see it too, even when it doesn't fit into a neat little box. And to help clinicians do just that, the latest version of the DSM actually includes a really cool tool called the Cultural Formulation Interview. It gives them a set of questions to help get to the heart of a person's actual lived experience. So instead of just asking about symptoms, it asks things like, how would you describe your problem to your family? Just think about that shift. It moves the focus from the doctor's textbook to the patient's world, which makes the whole process so much more collaborative and sensitive.
So, for a huge chunk of its history, psychology was really focused on what goes wrong, on dysfunction, on disorders. But over the last few decades, something really powerful started to shift. A whole new field popped up that started asking a totally different kind of question. What does it actually mean to be mentally well? What does it take not just to get by, but to truly thrive?
And that field is called positive psychology. Now, its goal isn't to replace all the critical work on treating mental illness. Not at all. It's meant to complement it, to complete the picture. The idea is to create a more balanced science of being human by seriously studying things like happiness, resilience, and what gives our lives a sense of meaning.
This new way of thinking gives us two really powerful words. On one side, you have languishing. You know that state where you don't really have a mental illness, but you're just not feeling great. You're kind of just, that's languishing. And on the other side, you have flourishing. And that's not just the absence of languishing. It's complete mental health. It's when you don't have an illness and you have high levels of well-being. It really shows that being healthy is so much more than just not being sick.
So what does it even take to flourish? Well, researcher Carol Reif came up with 6 key ingredients that go way beyond just feeling happy. It's about having a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. It's about feeling like you're in control of your own life and that you're good at managing your world. And of course, it's about accepting yourself, flaws and all, and having strong, positive connections with other people. These are like the building blocks of a genuinely good life.
And that brings us right to our final and maybe most important question. After this whole journey from trying to define what's abnormal all the way to exploring what it means to thrive, it really all boils down to this. Is real mental health just about not being sick, or is it something more? Is it about the active presence of well-being in your life? Something to think about.